It's quitting time, and that means everyone who's anyone in Dallas is going to the lake. At least that's what we're told by the good folks at KROK, and that's why traffic's backed up, or again, at least that's what Croc's DJ claims. I don't know, roads look fine to me. Anyway, a yuppie couple, who apparently hope to amount to something, is waylaid on their way to the Elysian Lake by a battered pair who've obviously been through hell. A yokel holds the man at rifle point, accusing him of murder. But once he's in custody, we learn he's a cop, and so he's not held accountable for anything, naturally. Flashback to what Coldiron, our hero, describes as the previous Thursday, which is apparently just the day before. It's 5 a.m. instead of 5 p.m. The movie's full of odd writerly ticks like this. And we're treated to an inexplicable, protracted musical montage as Coldiron drags himself awake and tools around his Texas ranch. He's a semi-skilled lassoer, it takes us 5 minutes to learn, and a lot of attention is paid to Coldiron's Mr. Coffee. The only thing I can figure here is that the movie makers are trying to make some sort of point about robotics. We later join Coldiron in a corporate meeting where we gather he's spearheading a high-tech project to create a new kind of robot cop, using a new material that eliminates the needs for trifles like a power supply or, you know, parts and all that. His bright idea is to roll up peace officer, judge, and executioner into one package because, you know, what could possibly go wrong? Now, how do our reckless cybernauts justify creating something so dangerous? Well, for one, they seem to think their modest incomes rate them a buy in the ethics department.
Well, who are we who create such a thing? Heroes and villains?
The only difference between a hero and a villain is the amount of compensation they take for their services. At our pay scale, I'd say we're heroes.
For another, we're told the invention won't be ready for at least another 25 years, and they take it as given the world will have devolved into an anarchic cesspool of crime and misery by then, and niceties like due process will no longer matter. So, let's see. 1988 plus 25, that's 13, carry the 1. I don't mean to alarm anybody, but... Back in his office, Coldiron gets a call from his boss, who demands product from his lab not in a quarter century, but in a couple of months. He's been skimming off the top, the boss reveals, and if he can't show the congressman funding the project results, he'll wind up behind bars. Coldiron protests and gets fired. His douchebag underlings take over and manage to accidentally unleash Rotor, Coldiron's unfinished prototype, in a matter of minutes. Like a pistol-packing baby duckling, Rotor imprints on the first moving violation he sees, a couple who speed by, bickering. He kills the boyfriend, but his fiancée makes off. Rotor, though, isn't far behind, and things look grim for her. Until her path crosses Coldiron. Together, they hatch a plot to use her as bait and put Rotor away for good. Well, okay, it's mostly his idea. Rotor, incidentally, is incapacitated by car horns, so they could just have the police honk at him and then blow him away with a rocket launcher. I guess they figured that wouldn't be fair. So instead, Coldiron tells Sonia to keep driving. Meanwhile, he picks up a colleague at the airport and sets her up in a hotel room. Then, their travel arrangements settled, they mosey back on to meet poor Sonia, who all the while has been fleeing from the rampaging Rotor for her life on, apparently, a bottomless tank of gas. I think Rotor may actually be the most technically inept of the dozens of Mill Creek movies I've seen. Take a moment and let that sink in. So why did I give it 2.5 stars instead of the 0 it probably deserves? My Shakespeare teacher in college liked to say he'd rather magnificent failures than humdrum successes. He was trying to make us write more interesting papers, and though the comparison to Shakespeare ends there, Rotor is sure a magnificent failure that takes chances. It's full of lovingly rendered but awfully clumsy montages and asides, laughably inept fight scenes, bizarre casting decisions, and most of all, strange, semi-coherent turns of phrase throughout.
I'm like a cemetery. I'll take anybody.
You may be so crooked you got to screw your head on.
We're not knocking over tin cans here. This is reality.
Look, Dirtwad, You fire me and I'll make more noise than two skeletons making love in a tin coffin, brother.
Never a black eye around when you got a steak.
Hey, what's the matter with you, buddy? Get your pecker caught in the plumbing this morning?
What's your intent in some little-known alloy? Is there some good vibration to its molecular tonality you can utilize?
And your holy grail? Well, that gets turned into a public journal with your name printed on a target at the bottom.
It's like a chainsaw set on frappe.
What are you planning, high-tech rock and roll to the rescue of civil law and order?
You're on my wavelength and you're right.
When I stack them, they stay stacked.
And look at you. You look like you got both eyes coming out of the same hole.
Great, except I don't know what any of that means.
I don't know if the screenwriter hoped to cash in on the conventional wisdom that Southern culture favors such expressions. But I got the sense these weren't time-honored saws at all, but for the most part spur-of-the-moment inventions, fueled by booze and maybe a toke or three. This weird dislocation in the writing turns up straight away. When I think of the sort of social events attended by, quote, everyone who's anyone, I think, say, White House correspondence dinners and British royal weddings, not weekend pilgrimages of rednecks fishing off a lake pier. If the movie makers are ever struck by their own malapropisms, though, they make no sign of it, and though even weirder lines are delivered with an affable seriousness, as though the actors knew what they meant. In fact, the movie's ineptitude in general is rivaled by the shamelessness in which it's given up to us. Never did I get a sense, as I do with, say, Laser Mission, House of the Dead, or the collective work of Jess Franco, of joyless cynicism or contempt for the audience. The auteurs behind R.O.T.O.R seem tickled pink to be making a movie, even if they show little aptitude for it. And that enthusiasm makes it on screen, even if nothing else does. You get a hunch the set of R.O.T.O.R was probably a fun place to be, unless, of course, you happen to be a competent filmmaker, in which case I imagine it would have been a damn sight frustrating. The point, though, is that R.O.T.O.R is lovably, not detestably bad, much more in the vein of Troll 2 than, say, Future Women. I'll add, though, that in terms of coherence, acting, and overall production values, Troll 2 totally blows R.O.T.O.R away, hard as this may be to believe. As a movie that owes a flagrant debt to 80s future shock masterworks Terminator and Robocop, R.O.T.O.R certainly has plenty of chances to echo these films' trenchant social commentary. What about the dangers of corporatocracy? The risk of allowing computers to run our lives, the vanishingly slim line separating man and woman from machine. But, no surprise, R.O.T.O.R instead shows an almost imperfect indifference to subtext. It's simply too busy delivering head-swimmingly surreal dialogue and seeing to it that every scene fails more spectacularly than the last to bother being in any way meaningful. Rare exceptions include Coldiron's quasi-magical explanation of the metal going into R.O.T.O.R's construction, as a kind of post-mechanical substance requiring no cogs or gears, a twist prefiguring in the usual B-movie fashion the polymimetic alloy of Terminator 2. Though I'm not terribly inclined to give R.O.T.O.R much credit in this case. But these moments are so half-baked they seem specifically meant to discourage anyone looking for higher commentary. If you're after a thoughtful Reagan-Bush-era movie about race, check out Boys in the Hood. If you'd like a fascinating meditation on the relationship between man and its creation, I think Blade Runner is still pretty easy to find. But if you're trying to throw a few back, maybe spark a J and laugh until you wet yourself, R.O.T.O.R would like to welcome you home.
Now I've got to wonder, were we playing God, breathing life into our artificial Adam, or have we lost sight of paradise? What was it Milton said? Did I request thee, Maker, for my clay to mold me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me?